Welcome to the Advanced Podcast. I'm Vikas, and it's great to have you with us. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with yet another visionary education leader who's shaping the future of education, not from a distance, but through the everyday decisions she makes, the risks she takes, and the vision that she carries. Our guest is Stacey Brewer. She's the founder and current chair of Spark Schools, and one of South Africa's most innovative school networks, committed to providing high quality and affordable education. Spark Schools began in 2013 with the opening of its first campus, Spark Ferndale. Since then, under Stacey's leadership, the network has grown to over 25 schools across Gauteng and the Western Cape, serving thousands of learners with a bold mission to bridge the education gap in South Africa. Stacey's journey began during her MBA at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, where the idea of Spark was born. Her background in business and a deep belief in equity in education came together to build a model that combines academic rigor, innovation, and community care. As chair of the board, Stacey now focuses on the long-term vision of Spark Schools, exploring how the model can grow sustainably and serve more learners across the continent. Her story is a powerful reminder of what can happen when business insight meets social purpose. Please join me in welcoming Stacey Brewer to the Advanced Podcast. I'm really excited that today we have Stacey Brewer, Spark Schools, with us on the Advanced Podcast. Stacey is someone I admire greatly for having actually created a disruptive force in an education system that perhaps needs the innovation. And since she's been going for, and she'll tell us a little bit more about the institution, she's got some 25 odd schools that she's created with a different model in a country that some would say desperately needs it. So welcome, Stacey, to the Advanced Podcast. And, I'm curious to know, tell everyone a little bit about South African education and what prompted you to set up Spark Schools.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vikas, first of all, for welcoming me on this podcast. And I'm really excited to share a bit more about South Africa and Spark with you and the listeners. So in South Africa, we currently spend the greatest proportion of our budget and GDP, and yet we rank bottom of the world if you look at various competitiveness reports. And I think the most recent polls assessment, they said 80%, so 8 out of 10 of scholars in grade 4 cannot read for meaning, which means they cannot learn. So this is not just a slight issue or a slight concern. This is a crisis. And we're going to lose generations after generations if we don't deal with it. And if we look at it at the landscape overall, yes, the government has prioritized education from a budget perspective, but our expectations have been exceptionally low in terms of what we expect from our kids. We look at pass rates at about 30, 40%. You see a dropout from grade R or grade 1 to matric, which is our grade 12. Half of the children are dropping out of school. So we're living in a country where our youth unemployment is sitting at over 60%. We've got kids that cannot learn. Majority of our children in grade 4 cannot learn. What are we doing to address it? If we do not take action now, there's going to be serious long-term consequences.
So tell us, when you started Spark, what was the thing that you that really, apart from these data points, there's usually a moment that a spark. There you go, a spark that actually is lit. So tell us about that moment.
So because I was actually doing my MBA at a business school here in Johannesburg with the idea to go overseas and get a decent job. And it was through that process that I was actually really shocked around the state of education in South Africa. I have been very privileged. I've gone to great schools. I went to a great university. And I really didn't understand or appreciate the extent of how bad it was. And so from there, I started doing more and more research, trying to understand what is going on exactly. And then I came across this whole emergence of low-fee private schools where parents are voting with their feet. They're deciding to send their kids to fee-paying schools over free government schools because they feel they can hold the family or the schools more accountable. And so from there, I actually did my thesis on a sustainable financial model for low-fee private schools to understand how are they low-fee, like what innovation is happening. Is this a school you'd want to send your own children to? And so from there, unfortunately, I didn't find anything interesting. There was no innovation and often very questionable if you would want to send your own kids to. And the way they were able to bring their fee structure down was pay your teachers, less and increase number of kids in the class. And so for me, that was just unacceptable. And then I just started doing more and more research, looking at models across the African continent. I spent some time looking at models in India, and then eventually I came across rocket ship education in the US that was pioneering blended learning at the time, which was about 2011, 2012. And then from there, I mean, I can explain more in terms of the time we spent with them, but from there, it really just took off.
So what's the basic idea of a Spark school?
The Spark, our big focus is we want to provide education that's affordable to the country. So we benchmark our total cost to educate against what government spends per child to educate. And we don't screen on academic ability. We're trying to prove that any child from any community can achieve. And that is, in fact, what we are doing. And so the learning model and the way it's been designed drives two things. So the way we use teacher time and space makes it very cost effective for us to operate at our price point. And we approximately $1,600 on average per annum. And it creates a very data-rich environment so we can differentiate our instruction. So we know down to micro objectives in terms of where kids are achieving. And then based on their needs, we are able to close that gap over time.
And in terms of where are you today? So how long has Spark been running? How many schools do you have? How many learners do you have? Or I think you call them scholars. So how many scholars do you have? What have been the peaks, the troughs? Tell us about all this stuff.
So we launched our first school in January 2013 with 160 children and 20 staff members. And today we operate 26 schools, educating over 17,000 children across the network and employing approximately 1,500 people. So we have not done M&A. It's been very, very much greenfield because we've got a very specific model that we want to roll out. And we want to prove what is possible at scale in terms of serving more communities. Highlights and lowlights, because they're like any entrepreneurial journey. You have your highest highs and your lowest lows. I would say the toughest part for me personally has been COVID. It was just a nightmare. Obviously, I mean, for most people in education, they understand the extent of it. You know, kids don't have the support at home. Parents are freaking out. We've got a lot of single parent households. We've got staff members. It was just a nightmare to manage. We also internally had some real stakeholder dynamics and politics. So for me, that was probably the lowest point. Parents weren't paying, and we had to actually close 3 schools down or, more consolidate them into other schools. So it was a very, very, very challenging time just in terms of business operations, but obviously also just in terms of dealing with everyone's personal health and their level of safety and what they felt comfortable with.
And the peak.
And the peaks. So I'd say my proudest moment, so for me, there's a lot of things that I'm extremely proud of.
Be very careful how you answer this question. Read my mind, Stacey.
No, I know. Okay, so for me, the size that Spark is today and the people that we employ, so as I mentioned, South Africa's our youth unemployment's over 60%, and majority, I think it's about 75% of our employees are the youth. And so that for me is, it's not just creating change within our, future generations, but also for adults. But my proudest moment where I got the most emotional was when Spark Soweto was announced the world's best school for community engagement. And for me, that was it was just a huge moment. If you look at the history of South Africa, where we've come from, in particular Soweto, the uprising, it's been a really, really tough and challenging time. And often many private schools wouldn't even go into what would be called townships because it just wasn't the thing to do, or they didn't necessarily believe that they should be providing the best education to all families. And so for us, by going into Soweto, by opening a private school, Spark Soweto is one of our best performing schools across the network, and being recognized globally for what they've been doing in terms of community collaboration based on that history was extremely moving. And when it was actually announced, everyone went crazy. It was so loud. I had such a headache afterwards, but you could see how proud people were. Families, people were picnicking outside. They were there for the whole day. It was a huge gathering. And even years later, a few years later, people are still speaking about it. For me, it's a nice accolade, and especially based on the history of South Africa, and in particular Soweto, being on a global stage was very important.
So thank you for saying that. And I remember sharing the news with your team that they were in our top 10. I remember I felt, gosh, the doors in this room, the windows of this room would have popped as a result of it. But I'm really pleased that it constitutes a peak. Now, tell me, in terms of Stacey, this podcast is really geared towards education leaders and thinking about high performance. Given the context that you've set regarding South Africa, the birth of your schools chain, your lows around COVID and managing all of that, and then your peaks of being recognized on a global stage, what is it that enables your organization to actually deliver higher performance? And so I'm trying to think about three things that you could perhaps give us an insight into that you think have done that for your institution.
Yeah, so Vikas, for me, I think first and foremost, it's people's mindset. So we don't, ideally from a staffing perspective, we sometimes get it wrong. We really believe in the potential of every single child. And everyone feels it's their responsibility to ensure that all scholars achieve. So it's really about no excuses. You can't say because a child comes from a certain background, it's not your problem. That is unacceptable. And so having that mindset is absolutely critical for me. Having a culture at school which is very much focused around the core values. So SPARK stands for our core values of service, persistence, achievement, responsibility, and kindness. And in terms of everything that we do, both from a staff perspective as well as a scholar perspective, we're reinforcing that all the time. From our Sparks Fly in the morning, where we say our Sparks Creed, to being recognized. And I think if you don't have that right mindset and core values as a way of holding the entity together and across multiple sites, it's going to be extremely, extremely different or difficult. And then I would say probably the third most important thing. So in a country where teachers aren't necessarily being prepared for the classroom, I believe one of the most important areas that's driven our success is our professional development of our teachers and school leaders. So we spend over 200 hours a year training and developing our staff, which is equivalent to a decade plus in a more traditional school in South Africa. And so we recruit graduates with the right mindset, the right potential, and then we develop them into what we believe are excellent teachers. And then if they demonstrate that, they are then able to move into leadership roles.
And so talk to me about the first one. Let's just go a little bit deeper into each. So you talk about mindset. Say more about that.
What worries me the most in this country, in South Africa, is we expect very little from our scholars or from our children in general in South Africa. Teachers, they're not well respected either. If you want to go into university and you don't have enough points, they say, well, at least you can become a teacher. And it's this constant, in even early days of Spark, when I said I'm opening school, they're like, oh, that's so cute. You can't get a real job. And that, for me, that mindset around education and it being sort of inferior is unacceptable. And so for me, we needed to make sure that we brought in people that believed in our scholars, that believed that teachers were professionals and they had the ability to deliver and grow within themselves, and that we believe in the voice of the parents. So we want to build those partnerships with our parents as well. We know school's only going to be there for 12, 13 years. But if we can help develop the parent-child relationship as well, that for us is critical. So it's more than just like a hope, but it's a serious belief and a serious level of responsibility in creating that change.
And when you talk about the second point, which is around culture, that one of the things that we do is Best School to Work, which actually helps schools assess and diagnose culture and help to improve it. You talked about your core values. And what I sometimes think about, I remember coming to South Africa actually once, and I went to one famous private school, and every school has their school motto looming large over the reception area in particular. And I don't think it goes further than that. That's the point I'm making, I think, was my observation. So when you talk about around your core values, how have you implemented that?
So it's just the way we operate completely at a school. So every morning, as I say, we've got Sparks Fly, which is our morning assembly, but it's not like what we knew at traditional principal speaking. Everyone is bored and then you go. So we go to class where what we do, actually, it's a way of bringing the community together. The whole school gets together. We say our Spark Creed, which is our daily promise. And then we do a song and dance. And it's to create this joy for learning and this excitement for the day. And that happens across all the schools at the same time. And it's one of the most joyful experiences. And that sets a tone for then the kids to go into the classroom. In terms of culture, it's also the way we speak to children. We've got certain language that shows a high level of respect and not just these are kids and they don't really have a voice or they're too young to be seen. You will see that we, especially with the scholars, if they demonstrate certain behavior of the core values, they get a core value ticket and then they can win a prize. We give feedback on report cards and homework packs to our parents in terms of how they're actually achieving and what we're seeing. And we've got various languages around social emotional learning that they, as parents, they are also able to ask their kids. So, for example, around the dinner table, the parent could ask, so how did you show kindness today? Or where did you have, what was your garbage can tool? What did you have to throw away when someone said something bad to you that you didn't like? And so that very codified way of operating and behaving has really enabled us. I would say probably what we haven't done right or not done strong enough, which is a big focus for me this year, is around what do those core values also mean for staff? What does it mean for an adult?
Yeah.
And what are those rituals? What's that common language?
I think it's amazing. I remember when your Soweto school did win, all we saw was just this dancing, this celebration, this noise, and it was just so wonderful to see. But you talked about the Spark Creed. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but what is it?
So Spark Creed is our daily promise that we say for ourselves and our community, and it's around service. What does service mean for me? For persistence, achievement, responsibility, and kindness. And at the end of it, we say, I'm a Spark scholar and I'm going to university. And we're not saying university is the answer. The point is, no one's embarrassed that's gone to university. The point is, they will have the choice and the ability to go to university if that's what they want. And often some of our scholars, they would be the first individual in their family to go to university. So that level of belief in it doesn't matter where you come from, you can make the choice that suits you when you're ready to enter the world.
And so when you talk about the malaise of public education in South Africa in particular, and you think about Spark, so if someone was to turn around to you and say, you're the education minister of the country now, or the education minister of the world, what are the things you would fix straight away? Hard to believe, I understand. But Minister of Education for the world, what would you do?
That would be a tough job. So if I had complete latitude and obviously no difficulty, for me, the big thing would be around child safety. It still worries me in terms of the safety of kids. So child protection, what are the expectations? What are the toolkits? What are the support schools can get? We in South Africa in our schools, it's a reflection of society. We see a lot of terrifying things. And, how's that going to transpire year on year and generation to generation? So child protection for me would be critical in setting those expectations and monitoring. I would look at regulation to how do you ease it, or how do you create a more like business friendly or education friendly environment where you can drive in more innovation. So I don't think there's a one size fits all for education at all. I think we all need to be trying new and different things. And so for me, that would be really exciting to see. Just you want to create an environment where people are pushing innovation and pushing thinking versus carrying on the way we've done it for like 200 years. And then thirdly, I would be interested in how do you create more choice for families? So choice is very empowering, and wealthier families generally have more choice, and families that are, say financially struggling or not as affluent have limited choice. And so would there be an opportunity for a voucher type system? I know it's controversial in certain areas, but how do you create more choice for families that they get to choose where they want to send their kids to, in a way of also holding the schools accountable and probably creating a more competitive environment, which only means one thing, and that means it's better for the scholars or the children, the consumers and the families that they're serving.
And do you see a space for public education?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think 100% need public-private partnerships of sorts. I think it's too big. It's more how do we work or collaborate better that makes it, we can serve our families better. So I don't think you could have one without the other. I think definitely you need both. I think the government, perhaps their role should be slightly different, maybe not just operating all the schools and maybe providing more governance structures, whatever the case is. But there's too much red tape overall. And I just wonder if they could ease certain areas that would make an environment that would be more conducive to new operators starting, as well as more innovation. And in fact, in South Africa, it's one of our constitutional rights that we are allowed to open and run private schools, which I think is highly encouraging.
Stacey, if I shift the focus a little bit, I know recently you've been on a global tour to understand what's happening in innovation around schools. You in fact visited our mutual friends in Brazil, in Peru, and I'm sure other places as well. What have you seen? What are the things that you're seeing that are truly innovative, or could be perceived as innovative in your context in particular, that you're seeing in other parts of the world?
Okay, so there are two things I would say in particular. So the first one is around obviously AI, and everyone's speaking about AI. But for me, it's not AI as a tool within a system like an EdTech offering. My big question is, how does AI transform the system? And so you've seen some players are thinking about that in terms of the use of data and really trying to drive that differentiation and understanding where the kids are at and closing those gaps and meeting them. And a second thing, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and I'm trying to figure it out, is from Salter. They've, I think, pioneered, if you want to say, I'm not sure anyone else has done that, the dynamic pricing model for school fees based on the family's background. So all of a sudden, you could offer, a school that's way more affordable or accessible for families that say have multiple children, have a certain income background, distance from school, etc. And I just wonder how that could open up more opportunities. So those are two of the areas I'm extremely excited about. What we're starting to see, and we've been connected, via the ELF group, is also around how do you start tracking your social emotional learning? So everyone can say, oh, I'm teaching certain things, but how do you know? And how do you know how they're being benchmarked globally? And so we're speaking to Devi from the Edge also to start tracking Spark scholars and how our kids are doing performing against the global benchmark, and as well as then tracking in a more independent way. So those are some of the really exciting things that we're seeing and starting to investigate a lot more. Oh, and then one more thing. Sorry, Vic. So what I'm finding really interesting, so out of Sistemas in Brazil, and then you've got lead schools in India, they've really been pushing the learning system offering. And so for me, that's also encouraging because to open and run schools is so expensive and it takes so long. So how do you take the essence of your specific learning system and then sell that on? And that allows you to now increase your influence, not just increase your reach, but how could it now offer something different to other schools that are not part of a network, but now can be part of a network, and hopefully enables them to be better at what they do in serving their families.
So what would that be for Spark then?
What, the learning system?
Yeah, what would be the thing that actually stands you apart that others would want a part of?
No, because this is my job at the moment. So what we're actually doing, I think a very big and important part of what we do is our differentiation based on data. And so from grade 4 onwards, our kids are actually rotating on their own schedule, moving through different modalities of learning. The problem is it's done manually. So we're gathering data points, blah, blah, from all the various data. And then we putting in what our recommendation is in terms of how the kids are allocated either per term, every 2 weeks, depending on the need in terms of rotation within the classroom, as well as in more common area spaces. But we are in the process of actually doing an MVP this year, and then going forward is that we want to make sure that everything is automated in terms of understanding the scholars. So Vikas will have a very particular schedule based on how you learn and what needs you have, and Stacey could have something completely different. And if we can automate that, that would be game changing, because then you just give the teachers, here's a schedule, this is what you need to focus on. And so I think from that perspective, if we get it right, I think a lot of other schools would find it really, really interesting to be part of, and just learning and understanding kids more and more and tracking their progress. I would say also our focus on professional development and leadership development would be a huge win for a lot of schools, because Spark has been started under the idea of a lot of constraints, human capital, financial, etc. And so having that taking that raw talent and potential and, making sure that they become really effective as teachers and teachers and leaders, that would be a huge win. And the way Spark is, as I mentioned earlier around the scheduling, we're very cost effective. So we're getting a lot of international attention saying, I don't understand how you're doing what you're doing at your price point. And it's a way, as I say, the learning model's been designed. There could be really interesting things that other schools could look at and potentially adapt to their setting that can also make them more cost effective.
So when people say that blended learning is just a fancy statement, what do you have to say about that?
I feel everyone's blended learning. Since COVID, everyone is blended learning. It's just a word or two words that get thrown around. No one actually knows what it means. For parents, it must be highly confusing. And so we're removing that from Spark completely. We're saying we focus completely on personalized learning. For us, blended learning wasn't just your device on with a child that you could babysitting device. For us, what was important that it was how do you use technology that's integrated into the learning system that drives cost efficiencies for us to operate at our price point, and it creates a very data-rich environment so we can differentiate our instruction. So that is blended learning for us. Big on data and cost efficiency. Now we're focusing completely on personalized learning and how do we do it better and quicker. And so for me, what I'm getting more and more excited about, perhaps this speaks to your point around, why would other schools buy the Spark learning system? If we can guarantee or show the level of progress or development of a scholar within a year, that's hugely powerful. So what we are seeing within Spark currently, we can grow kids 2 years within 1 year, based on how we operate. So that for me would be very important.
So what engagement are you seeing with the South African public education system as a result then? If you're so good, shouldn't the state want more of it?
So Vikas, we are very small comparatively. We've got 25,000 schools in South Africa, and we're 26. So we're really small. I would say it hasn't been a massive level of engagement. Where we are getting attention is out of Western Cape government, where they just financially, various provinces are under major strain, and they just don't have enough money to open schools. And so we're trying to work with them to see where we could go open schools, because financially they wouldn't have to contribute. But if they are able, to allocate a piece of land, we will rent, whatever the case is, it enables us to go into more areas. But other than that, because we haven't proactively engaged. But where I would rather us do is where we could, if the Department of Education or City of Joburg or whoever said, please, we need to open more schools here, and we got support in opening more schools, that for me would be huge.
Stacey, we've talked about a lot of stuff around the public education system, the national government. We've talked about the birthing of Spark. We've talked about your peaks and troughs. We've talked about innovation. We've talked about some trends. What we haven't focused on, where I want to go to now for the last segment of this interview, is around you as an individual and as a leader. And so when we talk about leadership is really tough. Leadership often is stated as being very lonely. Tell us a little bit about the most challenging things that you yourself have found regarding leading.
Because I think the hardest thing is leading people, honestly, and different, just the management. So I'd say one thing is obviously people and their development and growth, but often, as you say, it's very lonely. And so you're going to have to make some tough and courageous decisions that are completely unpopular, but you have to believe in yourself in order, to get a decision or move forward and take action. So for me, it would be around the actual leadership of individuals and everyone needing their own support in their development. And it's a constant work in progress. You never arrive. And especially in a high growth business, what the skill set that was okay yesterday is no longer okay today. So how do you bring them along quick enough? And then your personal journey is also, how do you make sure that you are still relevant in the future so the company doesn't outgrow you? And also just your belief in yourself when perhaps the rest of the world doesn't believe in you. Early days of Spark, the amount of things that were said to me, like, are you crazy? Can't you get a proper job? This is so cute. Is this a side project? And I was like, are you guys kidding? This is not a side project. This is quite serious. And just having that absolute belief where maybe there were a lot of other naysayers around, and just constantly having that resilience to push and push and push and make it better. And just, if things don't work, it's okay. Fix it next time and do better next time. So it's been the best journey, but also I'd say the hardest journey, because it's not just about professional development. A lot of it's about personal growth, being extremely vulnerable, understanding what you're good at, what you're bad at, being okay with that, and then hiring people that are smarter and better than you.
And what's the best piece of advice you've received in that regard?
In terms of people?
Yeah.
I'd say the best. So I'm part of YPO, and I'm part of a variety of, and I've got coaches, etc., a variety of support groups, if you want to say, and providing different levels of support. And I would say probably the best advice or the best level of encouragement, in particular, I've got from my board and from my shareholders, is that even though it's a lonely journey, speak up as bad things happen. So don't try to fix everything yourself. Just if something happens, just immediately notified because there's collective wisdom in the group of the board, as well as some of the shareholders, where before I just always wanted to solve it myself and then say, this is a situation, this is the outcome. Where now, in reflection, in terms of my leadership style, I now flag things immediately, even if I don't know the answer, even if it isn't solved. And I can feel that the board has a greater understanding in terms of the challenges of the business, but also willing there to support during the tough times and not just the good times.
And what role do these kinds of communities hold? So, for example, we're both part of the Education Leaders Forum. What's been the relevance of that for you?
So for me, it was just completely opening my mind to global players. I had not ever had that opportunity. People that are highly inspiring. I felt like a grade 8 with a grade 12 in the room. So I was learning, and I still have so much to learn. And so that exposure to global players, understanding different markets, understanding different industries, from K to 12 or the EdTech offering. But what I love most about it is this trust and the willingness to share. So for me, it doesn't matter the situation. Again, you can say, this is what I need help, or can you introduce me to someone, or does this make sense? And people are there to support and help. And then you don't feel alone. And often they'll say, oh, we've dealt with that, or oh, this happens a lot. I mean, okay, this is not just a Spark thing. This could be an industry thing.
Stacey Brewer, Managing Director, I should say Chairperson of Spark Schools nowadays. Thank you so much for taking part in this podcast. I'm sure our listeners will have gained a lot of insight and value from this half an hour that I spent learning about you and your journey. So thank you so much, Stacey.
Thank you, Vikas.
What I really loved about my conversation with Stacey on the Advanced podcast was we went through a lot of things. We talked about the state of South African public education. We talked about the birth and the origin of Spark Schools. We talked about innovation. We talked about high performance. She showed her vulnerable side and talked about her bigger challenges and how she motivates herself. But more importantly, when we think about the three things that she focuses on to drive this conversation on high performance in a system of 25 schools, she brought it down to three things. One was mindset. So I read it as from the interview that you should expect more from people. The second point was around culture, and especially around their core values. And she talked about how in their schools every morning, rather than just a plain old boring school assembly, they recite the Spark Creed, and again, which seems very empowering, and how they organize around their core values that they have in their school system. And the third point on high performance is something that comes up quite a bit, but yet, folks sometimes struggle to actually deliver on, which is around professional development. And the number of hours that is poured into its education workforce, I think it's quite impressive and actually a lever for high performance. I thank Stacey for sharing those three particular insights and all of the learning that comes from actually operating such a fast growth schools network and building that in a place like Africa. If you've enjoyed this interview, please hit subscribe on any of the podcast platforms that you use so that we can get better guests and we can do more. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this interview.